Today we're studying 3 head-on images from photographer Stephan Bauer to learn about his photographic style. We'll look at his use of weight, lines, space, and balance to create these beautiful images. First, I want to talk about light in the image. Here the sky is relatively bright and the bottom is relatively dark, and the Porsche, being white, is also relatively light. Stephan uses this technique really well, having either a bright subject and a kind of light-dark contrast, or vice versa. And the point of this is an airy sky and a darker foreground is going to pull your eye down to the image, and then having that brighter car is also going to create focus on the subject. It's a nice effect. Stephan does an awesome job using light. Next, let's talk about the lines. This is our main compositional element of this type of shot. So you have the leading line, and it's just touching the edges of the car. The road is always going to create a nice natural leading line for this type of shot, so you want to use it to your advantage and use the symmetry that it creates. Stephan's style is really anchoring on the edges of the image with the leading line, and so pay attention to how you have the road exiting the frame there, and by doing that, it's going to create this motion towards the car, so it effectively is pointing right at the edges of the car. And then he has these kind of secondary lines. This is less important. The road could be going straight back or off to the right. It wouldn't really matter so much. The point is, when you're in the field, try to use this line as your reference point, depending on the focal length that you're using. And you want the road essentially to just touch the edges of the car right there. It's the best way to think about this. Once you have everything framed up, now we want to start talking about space in the image. The thing that you'll notice with his style is how much negative space there is. So if you're looking to the left and the right of the car, it's actually fairly empty, or completely empty really, as is the foreground of the car. It's just road. And now let's throw on the thirds. And this is the best way to help orient yourself and think about negative space, is just using the headlights as targets. So all of his images have, to a certain degree, with this head-on shot, or same thing from the rear. So he's using the tail lights as a guide for that bottom third and those 2 vertical third lines. And placing the headlights there is going to kind of help orient the subject and give it the right negative space on the left and right. So better to have the bottom left and right be empty than have something cluttering that up. Next, let's talk about the balance of the image. I'm going to throw on this bullseye here, and you can see it's a very symmetric image. So splitting it right down the middle, you have a 50-50 split there. Using that badge as a target, you can split right down the center. And then this compositional element is true of all of his head-on shots. The vehicle is never above the 50% line. So he's splitting the vehicle in half vertically, and then all of the subject is below that halfway point. All of this is having the effect of drawing your eye down to the subject in the image. Awesome. Let's take a look at the next one. This is the same setting as the previous one, using that element of light sky and dark foreground to pull you down and focus you in on the subject. These strong anchored leading lines. So that is just going to brush against the side of the car and create this nice frame around it. This image has a lot of secondary leading lines, so all these kind of tiny things, and they all help frame the car. Like, the more of those you have, the more focus there's going to be on the subject. But the real critical point is the anchored left and right part of this to create that strong frame. Again, negative space. So we're orienting the car along the thirds and making sure that there's plenty of room to the sides and below. Using those tail lights in this case to make sure that we're framing it correctly. And something else that I've noticed he does is that bottom third also relatively splits the car in half. Depends how big the car is, but it's this nice symmetrical element that you can think of, having that third kind of chop the car right in half. Again, throwing on our split here, make that T shape, split the car right down the middle, and then keep the top half empty. Okay, here's our last one, and this is a little bit different in terms of light. This is actually all dark around the edges. The lightest point is actually the vehicle. And so that's going to really focus attention right onto the subject. It's a great technique to use the light in your favor for this. The anchor points are a little different in this one, but again, you'll see he uses that style of having one of those main leading lines just brushing up against the side of the car. Overall, it's like framing the vehicle using those lines. Some minor secondary lines here. It's always helpful if you can have one from the top kind of going down. It creates really that nice triangle leading you down the road. You should be very familiar with this technique now. Lots of open space, using the lights on the thirds, and we'll just drop that grid on here as well. And those are basically perfectly on the taillights there, leaving all the empty space, and then that bottom third line is just gonna cut the car right in half. Symmetry, splitting right down the middle 50-50, and then leaving everything below the halfway point. All right, to summarize. Number 1, use light to create the overall weight of the image. Number 2, anchor the leading lines of the road on the left and right side of the image. Number 3, make sure there's lots of negative space by using that rule of thirds. And number 4, balance the image 50-50 down the center and make sure it's below that 50%. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.